I think our stop is actually called the Balcarres Redoubt. It's called Freeman's Farm because this is where John and Ethelana Freeman leased 150 acres of land, had a family. They had a house located right about where this big tree is and the bench. They had a house here. A barn located near where you see those large trees. A big barn was located there. They had cleared somewhere along the lines of 20 or so acres. What you see now is a field forced configuration, which is pretty good, according to what it would have looked like after the British arrived. After the British then stay put, build fortifications, cut clear lines of fire by cutting trees. But if you were here in, let's say, August of 1777, just a month before the battles of Saratoga, imagine the field a little bit smaller. Imagine the tree line all the way up to pretty much where you see the tall grasses. Down on the southern side of the field, according to maps in one description, there were a lot of standing dead trees out in the open. And we figure that John Freeman was girdling the trees, hoping to clear that area over there. Now this field down there was clear at the time. This is where John Freeman and Ethelana Freeman had their cultivation. This is where they were growing their, quote, maize or Indian corn, their wheat, their rye, their barley, their flax. That was grown down here in that space. Up here they referred to this as the lawn, which again is where their house was. You had various paths, christening and crossing through here. Nothing more than wagon paths. Certainly nothing substantial. This was not a highway to anywhere. It's just the system of roads that the Freemans and a couple of the local people used to come through this area when that was necessary. Now the Freemans, John, Ethelana, had 8 children, and they were, when the war began, Loyalists. This was a Loyalist family. So we saw with the Nielsen's, we have those that are on the revolutionary side. We have the Beamises, who are a little less clear as to where their loyalties lied, what am I saying? And then with the Freemans, we know that their loyalties lied with the crown. They were loyalists, or royalists as they were also called. And we don't know much about their particular situation. It's kind of clouded. But we do know that they were not here when Burgoyne came through here. They were already with Burgoyne's army. They had already sought refuge with Burgoyne's army. John and his eldest son Thomas joined up with one of Burgoyne's loyalist regiments called Jessup's Rangers. So they were given muskets and uniforms, red coats with green trim, and then they were put out with Jessup and his guys, and then they had to do a soldier's duty. Yeah.
Now, so we've got 3 basically neighbors.
Yeah.
With 3 very difficult, 3 different loyalties.
Yeah.
Do we know, did that cause any neighbor issues? You know, they're like, oh, those filthy loyalists 2 hills over.
It typically would, yeah. As for actual hard evidence,
do we have anything?
I mean, the Freemans left before the battle. Before Burgoyne got here, they left. Why did they leave? When did they leave? Under what auspices did they leave? We don't know, unfortunately.
And what happened to the house?
The great mystery.
Did that just collapse? Okay.
Yeah, get there. But and that's fine. As for the Beamises, there is actually a story. I didn't mention this, but when you're in the militia, if you are, a man, and you are between the ages in New York anyway of 16 and 50. 60 in case of an emergency. If you are a non-Quaker, if you're not a government official, if you're not one, every mill shall have 2 millers and never less. So, if you're one of 2 millers, you can't be called for militia service. They had all these rules and regs about who serves in the militia. But suffice to say is most property owners / freeholders of leases who were male between certain ages were in the militia. The great majority were in the militia. This includes John Nielsen. This includes Jotham Bemis. Now, John Nielsen was ordered by his captain, a guy named Ephraim Woodworth, who actually owned the house that Gates took as his headquarters. John Nielsen was ordered by Captain Woodworth to go over to Jotham Bemis's farm and collect cattle from Jotham Bemis, because Jotham Bemis did not do his militia duty like he was supposed to do. And according to the regulations set forth by the colony of New York, if you don't do militia duty, you're in big trouble. Unless you have an excuse approved by the captain ahead of time, you're going to be fined. And either it's going to be in money directly or in goods, which will be sold at public auction, and then that's your fine. Any overage goes back to you as the offender. They were nice that way, I guess. So John Nielsen was ordered to collect cattle, and this happened twice in 1777. We have the original receipts in our archives. Very interesting, but you have specific example, not of any kind of fight between the two guys, or the Woodworth or Nielsen or Jotham Bemis or words exchanged, but we do have direct evidence of Jotham Bemis not serving and the consequences for that non-service.
Do we have any evidence of that happening to the Freemans?
No, that's the problem. The Freemans are kind of a mystery. Like I was saying, we know that they did leave. We don't know when. It was very early in 1777. That's the best we can say. Might have even been as early as 1776. But again, exactly when, under what auspices, were they having problems directly? Was it just a philosophical thing that they just didn't want to stay here because this whole, the Committee of Safety sickened them? Who knows? We don't know. Of course, moving a whole family, leaving the property is a huge deal. This is a big deal. Imagine leaving your home, my home. I can't imagine it. It's like, what? But they did. They did. Now, were they compelled to? We don't know.
Would they have had any idea that a fight was coming here?
No, none at all. Because the Freemans, how do I put it? Even if they were aware of Burgoyne's intentions on getting to Albany, which they would not have been, even if they were aware of that, they would not have necessarily had the understanding that that army would have to make the move on this side of the river. And further, there is no reason to believe that there would be any combat here as opposed to a mile north or a mile south or anywhere up and down the valley. Plus, there was, especially with Burgoyne's early successes, a belief that the American resistance was gone. It was just done, because the American forces were just, as you know, beaten out of Ticonderoga without any substantial battles and skirmishes, but no battle per se, no siege, really. The British didn't have to break the walls of Ticonderoga down to force the Americans to retreat. Not like that at all. They gave it up, of course, so as to fight another day. But Burgoyne, his messages and all the people writing about it were so, in Burgoyne's army, were so optimistic about the success of the army. At that point in July of 77, no problem. Any resistance is going to be minimal, they thought. That's why Burgoyne sends such a paltry force out to Bennington, Vermont, because he thought, yeah, no problem. We'll send a couple hundred dismounted dragoons and some loyalists, Indians, and 50 British troops, and easy, no problem. Little did they know, John Stark and the militia had other plans because they just didn't conceive of the idea. They didn't expect it. And this is, I think, ultimately Burgoyne's biggest strategic drawback. And when it comes to his failure in this campaign, he's always underestimating the Americans, constantly underestimating them. Here, even as late as the battles of Saratoga, he's still underestimating them. The Battle of Freeman's Farm is an example of his underestimation of the Americans. So when the Freemans are gone, the property is abandoned. As you know, the American forces are at Bemis Heights and the surrounding high ground. They've had a week to build up their defenses. Bemis Heights is about 1.5 miles south of us. So from stop 3 to here, it's about 1.5 miles, a little bit more. And the British, on the 19th of September, were in a position about 1.5 miles or so north of us at a place called Swords' house. Swords' house. Swords' house because a guy named Thomas Swords owned a house there, owned the property outright. And Thomas Swords was, in fact, him and his wife Mary Swords, they were loyalists. Their sons were printers for the British government down in New York City. It's quite an interesting story unto itself, but Burgoyne set his headquarters up at Swords' house on the 17th of September. And so the army is there on the 18th. So these armies are about 3 miles apart from each other. Both armies know where the other army is. Both armies have spies and scouts, reports back and forth. The Americans actually had some deserters go to Burgoyne and report about the American strength and positions because they were freaked out that the British were here and they were going to just trounce over Gates's army. And so Burgoyne had a lot of intelligence as to the disposition of the American forces, And he was aware of that gauntlet, that bottleneck down in the valley. And he did not want to take a chance of trying to drive his army down the valley because he thought it would be folly. He thought it would just result in failure. So what he decided instead to do, and this is what was shown in our film and on our fiber optic light map, is split his army up into 3 separate groups, 3 separate columns. And you'd have one column down at the river. That column was commanded by Baron Riedesel, the German commander with Burgoyne's army. And with that force, most of the German common infantry soldiers, the musketeers, they were down there. He also had a couple British units. He had the supplies of the army, the stuff of the army. All the women and children were down there. The hospital was down there. The big heavy siege guns, they were down there. The Royal Navy contingent, all the refugees of the army, like Ephelana Freeman and the 8 children, they were all down there, down near the river, with a couple thousand troops. On the other side, the other column, the westernmost column, which would have been located about 3/4 of a mile to the west of us, was the Advanced Corps, commanded by General Fraser. Now, Advanced Corps, the troops were advanced, meaning they were advanced soldiers. Remember, those light infantry, the grenadiers, be they German or British, they were all over there with that column. Some of the light artillery, heavy, mobile artillery that could move quickly. So they had a lot of the elite forces of the army, plus those troops that were very good at fighting from behind trees and fences, the Loyalists, the Indians, the French-Canadian militia. They were all over there with that column. The center column, which eventually came right through here, bumbled onto Freeman's Farm. Little did they know the kind of fight they would have to fight that day, was the common British infantry. 3 regiments of foot, the 20th, the 21st, and the 62nd regiments. They were here with 4 light 6-pounders. You see that light 6-pounder right there? That's a reproduction, but they had 4 of those just like it. And so those guys, the center column, their plan was to come right through here, right through the woods, through the field, and with Fraser's Advanced Corps, they were gunning for the western side of the American lines of defense. They were looking to target the summit. Remember the summit, stop 2, with the Nielsen House? They were looking to go there because that was conceived to be the weakest point in the American lines of defense. They knew that the defenses down at Bemis Heights, in the valley, on top of the bluffs, way too strong. They'd never be able to break through it. But that part over there where the summit is, now that's a different story. Yeah, the reports acknowledge that they've refused the flank, the Americans. They had the flank bent back so as to defend from any attack from the west. But if the British can make some kind of circuitous route around and with their artillery come around the lines and attack from the back, then it would work well. I think a good parallel example of the British strategy on the morning of the 19th of September is what you had at Ticonderoga. The Americans had Fort Ticonderoga, so what did the British do? They just run rings around it. They envelop Fort Ticonderoga. They envelop the peninsula. And then when they get the plan to mount artillery on top of Mount Defiance, the American command realizes, holy cow, those guns can easily rake over the French lines. They could randomly bombard inside the fort. Let's leave. And they left. So the British are thinking, hey, it worked there. Let's do it here too. We will threaten the left of the American line, the western flank of the American line, the summit area. And as we approach, either the Americans will make a stand and we'll beat them, or they'll simply be scared out of their wits and retreat, just like at Ticonderoga. So that's the British strategy. And here come the British. It's the morning of the 19th of September. They've packed up their camp. All the tents are in their baggage carts, which again, they're down near the river. But the soldiers themselves, they've got 3 days worth of rations. You're talking literally, quick math, let me think, there's 9 pounds of food in per haversack. That's that sack, that linen bag you carry on the side of your body. Full canteens, knapsacks full of whatever the soldiers have on their person. Each man has 100 rounds of ammunition. And of course they have muskets with bayonets. They're ready to go into battle. So they march into position and then they advance. Now the American command, Horatio Gates, Benedict Arnold, and the various officers, they have scouts in front and sentinels, and okay, they get now word that the British are in what's called marching order. They've taken down camp. They're coming this way. And so Horatio Gates, right, his strategy, this is Gates's concept of strategy. He thinks that it's best to prepare the lines of defense, prepare the American forces, pack up camp, just in case the British get an edge in battle, so that they can make a quick escape, the Americans, with their baggage intact, as opposed to Ticonderoga, where they had to leave just about everything behind. They don't want to get caught with their pants down again, the Americans. So Gates thinks, okay, we'll prepare the defenses, load the cannons, everybody ready, you know, we'll be ready for them. The lines are strong enough to defend. All reports tell Gates, and accurately so, that the forces are about equal in numbers. So if you're an attacker and the defender, who's behind fortified lines, has the same number of troops as you do, the attacker has the great disadvantage, because the general thought is that you want to have 3-to-1 advantage over your defender. So if you're attacking, you want to have over 3 times as many troops as the defender does. So Gates has a great advantage insofar as that he has equal numbers to Burgoyne, or just about equal numbers to Burgoyne. And so he's thinking that that's all he's going to do. How many battles has Horatio Gates ever fought in during the Revolutionary War up to this point? None. 0, that's right. None. Not a one. He has commanded armies before, Ticonderoga in 1776 and earlier in 77, for example, but he has never, ever, ever commanded an American army that is now at this point being committed to a battle. A battle is, in this case, coming to him. So it's never happened before. So, you know, is he playing it, therefore, a little conservatively? Yes, he is. Because, you know, I gotta say, if I was Horatio Gates, I'm not so sure that I would be so confident in the American soldiers' ability to fight. I mean, look at the whole campaign so far. Look at how George Washington's army was thrashed throughout 1776. Long Island, Kips Bay, Harlem Heights, etc., etc. And the American evacuation of Canada with the Battle of Three Rivers and the Cedars and such. So things just don't look good on paper. And the former Adjutant General of the Army, Horatio Gates, you know, you can imagine he's thinking this. So being behind the defenses is probably the best bet they have. Still thinks. But somebody else has a different idea, a different plan. And that man is, of course, Benedict Arnold, the de facto second in command of the army under Gates. And Benedict Arnold says, well, you know, all right, Gates, I have an idea. Why don't we send out the specialized forces, the riflemen, all 400 of them, and the light infantry battalion, all 300 of them. And together, those guys can go out into the woods in advance of our camp. They can scout the enemy out, see exactly what their lines of approach are, skirmish with them, encounter them, you know, shoot from the woods, what have you, slow the British advance up, so much so that by the time the British get to attack us, they will have been spent, because many of their officers theoretically would be shot down, because they did sometimes target officers, the riflemen. They tried to do that purposefully. And, you know, the artillerymen, maybe the riflemen would try to shoot down the artillerymen as well, making the artillery, therefore, less effective by the time it could be brought to bear against the lines of defense. And Gates said, okay, you can do that, Benedict Arnold. You can send out the riflemen and light infantry. And then Arnold says, can I also support them if necessary? Gates agreed, yes, you may support them if necessary. Arnold sends out the riflemen, the light infantry. Now, either by accident or design, we don't know, but it was very purposeful. Those riflemen and the light infantry were sent from the summit, stop number 2 on the tour road, and they moved through paths in the woods, and guess where they came? Right here to Freeman's Farm. The riflemen were in the column with the light infantry. The riflemen were in the van. The riflemen were in the rear. I'm sorry, what did I say? The riflemen were in the van. The light infantry were in the rear. So the light infantry were kind of back behind the riflemen. The riflemen arrived here first. Now, as the riflemen are approaching, they heard gun firing. American sentinels, you know, individual pairs of soldiers out and about throughout the woods in front of the main American line, as far north as this, they began to skirmish with some British sentinels in the woods over here. So that's probably what drove the riflemen to come to this spot. We're guessing, we don't know for a fact, but it just sounds reasonable and logical. So the riflemen come here under the command of Daniel Morgan, and these guys from Virginia and Pennsylvania with their rifle pieces, they're ready to go because they were sent up here by Washington particularly to fight off Burgoyne's Indians, but there aren't really many Indians with Burgoyne's army anymore, so now they're going to be used against redcoats and blue-coated Germans, and they're happy to do that too, believe me. So the riflemen come onto the scene, and at the time that they arrive, it just so happens that the piquet of the British center column advances through the wood line over there. Now a piquet, in this case, consists of about 100 officers and men, and it's basically a screening force. So typically as this center column is advancing, they got their sentinels in the front, individual pairs of soldiers, followed up by the piquet, which is a screen of troops, and then the main line itself. You don't want your main line just bumbling through stuff. You want to make sure the coast is clear. You want to make sure that you know what you're encountering, what situation you're getting into as you approach. So here comes the piquet. The riflemen are here, and they're like, all right, let's get them. So a battle starts right here, begun by the sentinels in the late morning. Then at about 12:30, the piquet with the center column and the riflemen start shooting at each other. At about 12:30, the fight was pretty fast. The British piquet fell like a house of cards, and they just fell back, crashing through the woods for the safety of the center column. Now the riflemen stupidly thought, whoa, this is brilliant. We just forced them to retreat. Let's go get them. So what they decided to do, the light infantry, their support was still way back there. The riflemen decided to pursue. And as they're doing so, it just so happened, the timing was totally against the riflemen here, that General Fraser with his advanced corps over there to the west, having heard the firing of the sentinels earlier in the day, had sent about 100 men, light infantrymen, to see what was afoot. And as the riflemen began to pursue the remnants of the piquet, the light infantry came upon the flank of the riflemen, and the riflemen were scattered to the four winds. It was pretty bad. Although the riflemen casualties were pretty low, they were just completely scattered. The men were running, and officers and men were running in all directions. Remember, riflemen, they have great rifle weapons, but those weapons have no bayonets. These light infantry troops now, with their bayonets, came upon the scene, and the riflemen have to run for their lives because there's no way they can stop this bayonet attack. So the riflemen are scattered to the four winds, and now the light infantry comes. Henry Dearborn's light infantry from the Army of the United States, 300 men, officers and men. They come to the field to see that the riflemen have been scattered or are being scattered, in the process of being scattered, realize that there's no way they can come up to support them in time. It's over by the time they would even get to them. They decide to go into the woods. It was wooded at the time, remember, this whole field area was wooded, and they decide to get up on that hill right over there, all 300 of the men, get up in the woods on that hill. And it's from that hill that they were going to use as a point of observation to see what the British might do next. Because the riflemen were scattered, and the British held the field of battle so far. Now the question is, what are they going to do, the British? Well, they continue their advance. Their three regiments come onto the field. The 21st Regiment, the 62nd Regiment, and the 20th Regiment down there where the crops were located. They bring up their four cannons, 2 and 2, in two pairs. And the soldiers are ordered to take off their knapsacks, their haversacks, canteens. All that stuff comes off. A soldier doesn't go into battle with all these packs and weighed down with all this camp equipage. No, they go into battle ready to fight efficiently, whether they're redcoats or American soldiers. It's not just the American soldiers who are smart at combat tactics. They're not stupid. They're not going to go into battle with heavy packs. So they take all the stuff off and pile it behind them, and then they're ordered to advance. Where are they going? Right for that hill. Why? Because they see the Americans in the wood line. They're not hidden. I mean, there's trees, but they can see a line of 300 guys right in the woods, So the British are going for those light infantry soldiers commanded by Henry Dearborn. So Lieutenant Colonel John Anstruther and his 62nd Regiment, they march across the field, and they advance, and as they're approaching, another reinforcement arrives for the Americans. Colonel Joseph Silly, with or without an E. He advances onto the field in support of Dearborn. Now, how is it that Colonel Silly and his 1st New Hampshire Regiment arrived? Because Benedict Arnold ordered them out. Benedict Arnold, having heard the reports of the riflemen being scattered, Dearborn posting himself on the southern side of Freeman's Farm, realized, okay, if we're going to do this, we have to stop, to slow the British down during their advance. We have to send support. I have to send support. So he sends in Colonel Silly's 1st New Hampshire Regiment. And he did so because, remember, Gates said he may support them if necessary earlier in the day. And so Arnold says, all right, let's support him. Now, Gates apparently had nothing to do with this choice, but he didn't have to. Arnold was given leave to support Dearborn and Morgan. So here comes Joseph Silly's regiment, and the 62nd Regiment falls upon them. The light infantry weren't even engaged. Now, it's the 1st New Hampshire Regiment versus the 62nd Regiment of Foot. And in about 20 minutes, the 1st New Hampshire Regiment has received 60 casualties. Well, I should say 50 casualties. Almost 60 casualties. And they're just beaten off the field. They're so severely outgunned by the 62nd Regiment, they have to fall back. They've received too many casualties. And so they fall back, they do a U-turn, and they march back to the woods. Henry Dearborn in his journal says that here again he tried to help Silly, but he didn't arrive in time. So he couldn't save Morgan, he can't save Silly. But he's going to stay put on his hilltop position. Colonel Silly is going to fall back. They're marching back to the American lines of defense, and then as they're marching, they encounter another regiment. Colonel Alexander Scammell's 3rd New Hampshire Regiment has been sent by Benedict Arnold to support Silly. And so Silly is marching back, there's Scammell, and they're like, hey, why don't we all go? Do a U-turn, Silly, come back to the field of battle. Okay, let's go back. So he makes a U-turn, and now 2 battalions are sent to the field of battle. Scammell and Silly versus Anstruther, and Forster, George Forster's 21st Regiment. So these 2 British regiments, these 2 American regiments with Dearborn's light infantry are fighting back and forth. Now what happens is the situation, I mean, it's, well, I could be here all day talking about this and that, little movement of this unit and that movement, but this is basically the way the Battle of Freeman's Farm worked. That's how it began, but this is how it worked. For the next few hours, you would have the 62nd Regiment, 21st Regiment with their 2 pairs of cannons shooting into the woods, because just behind the wood line was the New Hampshire troops and Dearborn's light infantry. And they'd be shooting into the wood line. The Americans are just within the wood line, so they're using the trees for protection. At the same time, the Americans can simply, shoot out of the wood line and shoot at the British, who were more or less exposed on the open field. According to one New Hampshire officer, he says that the British were the only ones to employ artillery in the battle. But against us, he said, their artillery fire did little more than to take the limbs off the trees. That's what he said, according to his point of view in the battle. So apparently the 6-pounders were not very effective. And the British fire wasn't that effective, thanks to the trees blocking the way. It's very interesting. At the Saratoga Springs Historical Society, they actually have a piece of wood from a tree in the battles of Saratoga, and it is full of lead musket balls.
Is this solid shot or canister?
Solid shot. Well, the muskets.
Oh, I meant
yeah,
the artillery.
cannons.
Are they shooting solid shot or canister?
They are shooting what they call case shot, which is pretty much like canister shot, okay. And they're also shooting solid iron ball. That's all they've got.
When like little balls come out?
Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. Yeah. Imagine case shot, which is what the British are using, as well as solid iron shot. Case shot. Imagine just a bag full of grape shot-sized balls, because the British artillery didn't really have like canister grape and solid. That's not what they were using. They used case and solid, and case was kind of a mix. Kind of a cross between canister and grape, if that makes sense. So imagine a bag full of 1.5 inch or so diameter lead balls, solid iron balls, and that's what they would shoot at the enemy. And of course, there's the spray of the projectiles, which doesn't have the range that a solid iron ball does. If you have multiple little ones, they're not going to have the same range, but they have more of an effective, spray. So they can't go as far, but they can cover a wider range, I guess is what I'm saying. But according to that one guy, little more than to take the limbs off the trees. That's how ineffective they were. Now the British, realizing this, what do? They're going to, with their fixed bayonets, they're going to go into the woods. They have been trained at what is called treeing, which means fighting from behind trees. The British were trained at doing this. This is one of the things that they had to learn the hard way in the American War. So they were trained to do it in 1776 and more in 1777. So they go into the woods, and the Americans try to stand their ground, but no, they got to give way because the British attack is so overwhelming. Now the Americans, what they'll do, and they'll do this a lot, it's very brilliant actually, they will fall back through the woods. As they're kind of falling back through the woods, what do the British do? They pursue. But because of Benedict Arnold's brilliance, he continues to send reinforcements to the battle. He follows up Scamell's reinforcement with Colonel Thaddeus Cook's Regiment of Connecticut Militia, and then Colonel Nathan Hale's 2nd New Hampshire Regiment, and then Colonel Jonathan Latimer's Regiment of Connecticut Militia, then Van Cortland's and Livingston's regiments of the New York Continental Line,